the cost of living crisis is about to begin, or at least ramp up significantly. So
if you're in the UK, this will be going out on Mother's Day, so don't forget to send a card to your mum and tell her how much you love her before the cost of living flies through the roof and you can't afford flowers and cards anymore.
So yes, obviously this is caused by the draconian lockdown restrictions placed on much of the world, and of course the West's fascination with transitioning to renewable energy long before we have the technology to do so, and the ongoing war in Ukraine, and things are not looking good for the world economies. So I'm going to be looking at the UK and the US specifically, but problems facing both the UK and the US are probably going to be relatively typical of a lot of other countries around the world.
Right, yep.
So the first one I want to look at is this BBC article, which is titled, "Inflation hits a new 30-year high in February." So prices rose by 6.2% in the last 12 months to February, the fastest for 30 years as fuel, energy and food costs surge. Prices are rising faster than wages, and the Bank of England thinks it could hit double digits this year, which is...
Double-digit inflation is mad.
Yes.
That's not happened in my lifetime.
Yes.
In this country. And if
horrific.
If it goes to double digits, who's to say it will stop in the tens and teens? It could go up to the 20s and 30s.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it goes on to say, since December last year, prices have been rising at their fastest rate since the 1990s. Inflation is expected to speed up in April when the energy price cap is increased. This will push up the average household fuel bill up by £693 a year in England, Scotland and Wales, while a planned rise in national insurance will also put pressure on household budgets. The Office for National Statistics, ONS, said that gas prices were almost a third higher in February than a year earlier, and electricity prices were up nearly a fifth. The average diesel price hit the highest on record during the month, while food prices rose nearly 1%, the largest monthly increase since 2012. So it is coming. And what has our government done about it, before I get on to what's going on in the United States?
Sweet F all, perhaps? Or have they actually done something?
Not nearly enough.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So Rishi Sunak vows to cut income tax before the 2024 election, if we're all going to make it until 2024. So yes, Rishi Sunak has promised to cut the basic rate of income tax by 2024, as it says in the title. He also cut fuel duty by 5 pence and sought to protect lower earners from the impacts of April's national insurance increase. He said that inflation would soar to 7.6% this year amid uncertainty caused by the war in Ukraine, among other things. He rejected calls from the opposition and some Tory MPs to scrap April's 1.25% national insurance increase for workers and employers, which is designed to raise cash for the NHS and social care. So great, we're going to be taxed even more on top of our increasing bills. Isn't that lovely?
Fabulous.
Instead, he raised the threshold at which workers will start paying national insurance from £9,600 to £12,570.
Yeah, and on that note, I'd just like to say, so they reckon that inflation's going to hit double digits, probably 10% or so. Well, if inflation were 30% in a year, then those two numbers would be identical. 9,600 before would basically be 12,570 afterwards.
Yes.
So it's not as much of a gift as it seems.
No, it's certainly not. According to the BBC, this would amount to a £6 billion personal tax cut for 30 million people across the United Kingdom, a tax cut for employees worth over £330 a year, said the Chancellor. Yeah, I don't think that's going to cut it, personally.
No.
So, it's not just exclusive to the UK, and the US is experiencing a similar sort of thing. So, here's an article from ABC News. The average US gas price rises 22% in just 2 weeks to a record of $4.43. So yes, this shot up by a whole 79 cents in that 2 week period, which is absurd. That's massive.
Well, I think one reason, although I may be wrong, is that the West does import energy from Russia, and Russia yesterday they announced they were only going to accept gas and energy trades for Moscow energy in rubles. And of course, foreign countries don't exactly have huge stockpiles of rubles, so they've suddenly had to pile into the Moscow Stock Exchange to get rubles to actually buy oil and gas, which I believe has affected the prices and pushed them up somewhat.
It has, yes. So the Republicans, not one to miss out on a crisis, have began recruiting at gas stations. So if we take a look at this next picture, there's someone here saying, Chairwoman, I've spent the day registering voters at gas stations in New York. May I make the humble suggestion that the GOP do this across the country? And then you've got Laura Ingraham encouraging the Republican chairwoman.
Do that.
And eventually the chairwoman replied by saying, yes, we're already doing this across the country.
Good, absolutely. That's what you should be doing. That's smart politics.
It is. I mean, where better than to be at the gas pumps saying, okay, well, this is because of people like Joe Biden cancelling pipelines. And
they have missed a trick there. It should be pain at the pump, vote Trump.
Oh, well, they can't have it all.
I know.
Alongside this, you have people like Nancy Pelosi claiming that government spending is reducing the national debt and not causing inflation. So she says that global inflation starts with the Russian President Putin, and that increased government spending on domestic social programs would help decrease the national debt and bring down inflation.
Oh my God,
at home.
Isn't Nancy completely economically illiterate? And if so, how does she make all that money?
Yeah, she makes a killing at the stock market, so she must know a thing or two, surely.
But that's the opposite of how things work.
It is.
You don't print more money and inflation goes down, for goodness sake. Oh my goodness.
So it goes on to say, during the 2022 House Democrat Issues Conference, Pelosi referred to the record gas prices in the US as Putin's tax and Putin's gas hike. She said passing components of President Biden's multi-trillion-dollar social policy bill, called the Build Back Better Act, which is all but dead due to moderates' opposition, would make new investments in education and workforce development in a way that would eventually bring prices down.
Yeah,
which
in 2050.
Isn't how it works, yeah.
I wonder what her net worth will be in 2050.
And Fox News did something good here and brought up exactly what I would have brought up here. Gas prices across the United States had been rising sharply long before Putin launched Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Since Biden's first days in office, when he cancelled the Keystone XL pipeline and paused oil and gas leases on federal lands via executive order, this was literally in his first 2 weeks in office. The Biden administration released 50 million barrels of oil from the National Strategic Reserve on November 23rd, 2021, in an attempt to alleviate growing pains at the pump. Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. The Biden administration released another 30 million barrels from the reserve in early March 2022.
Yep.
So there we go. Obviously, the Democrat narrative on this is
the classic
ridiculous.
meme is that Nord Stream 2 is vital for Europe's energy security. You know, an international strategic necessity. Keystone XL. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. It's just gonna pollute us. We don't need it.
It's just obviously a failure policy. America has enough oil to be oil self-sufficient.
Yes.
So it doesn't need to be affected by, I mean, of course the international market's going to affect the prices somewhat, but it doesn't need to impact America to the degree that it is now.
More importantly, it doesn't need to impact Americans to the degree that it's doing.
Course, yeah.
But the way that governments have been reacting to this, it seems like they treat their people as an expendable resource, and it doesn't matter how high our cost of living gets, because we're just going to take it. They've got the power, the police, the whatever. We're not exactly going to riot. We're not going to go all like Arab Spring on their backsides, and they just feel very comfortable, as we saw with North America and the lockdowns for 2 years and Trudeau and the truckers' protest and so on. I think they feel like no one in the people is going to push back against them, so they just do not appear on their threat radar, and they take them for granted. They treat them like livestock.
Absolutely. So it's not just, of course, gas in the United States. Russia's Ukrainian war threatens to blow US food prices sky high as well. Apparently, they're looking at everyday inflation reaching almost 10%, and they say that last month's figures were close to 8%. That means that consumers, including those who are living paycheck to paycheck, are going to pay more for food. And apparently, Russia and Ukraine produce 25% of the global wheat supply, according to the OEC. And while neither
exported wheat supply.
And while neither of these countries export wheat to the US directly, their absence from the global market is expected to strain supply and push prices higher.
That's how it works.
Which is true, yes. And it's even worse than that, because this is affecting domestic crops in the US as well. So despite robust crops, US farmers cannot sell wheat, which could inflate food prices further. And it says the US wheat market has been turned upside down by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, with wheat futures soaring so high so fast that many buyers are backing off, leaving farmers with diminished markets, even though they have plenty of crops to sell. Meanwhile, a shortage of fertilizer threatens future crops. So yes.
Wait, how does that work? I don't understand that.
So basically, they have to. US farmers have to sell off their crops, don't they? And therefore, if the price rockets so high that people are not really interested in buying it, it throttles the demand for it. Even though there is technically a shortage, the price is so high that people just don't see the investment as worthwhile. So I wanted to look at what is going on in Ukraine, because this is not seemingly going to end overnight and be nice and rosy. Even if, the war did end, they've still got to rebuild and start the economy. Yes, exactly. So I'm going to have a look here. What is Ukraine known for? What is Ukraine's biggest exports? And of course, it is known as the breadbasket of Europe, which isn't exactly ideal for wheat. Apparently 32 million hectares of land is cultivated every year in Ukraine. I imagine not very much at the minute, though. This has the ability...
all of the tractors are busy tugging Russian APCs by the footage we're seeing.
Yeah, I've seen those as well. Apparently, the amount of food they produce has the ability to provide food for 500 million people.
Wow.
Which is ridiculous, isn't it?
That's incredible.
In 2019, Ukraine ranked number 51 in the world in terms of total export value, but it is truly a world leader in terms of agricultural exports. Ukraine produces 18% of the world's sunflower seeds, safflower or cottonseed oil exports, and 13% of corn production, 12% of global barley exports, and 8% of wheat and mesclun.
Yep.
In absolute figures, corn is the largest Ukrainian export market and brings in a massive $4.77 billion every year. Seed oils, 3.75 billion, iron ore 3.36 billion, and wheat 3.11 billion are also major exports. And
massive.
Just to hammer home how dependent some countries are on Russian and Ukrainian exports, let's have a look at this final image of African dependence on wheat from Russia and Ukraine. And you've got places like Somalia, who are 100% dependent on a combination of Russian and Ukrainian wheat.
Why is it that whenever anything goes wrong, Somalia is always at the bottom of the pile?
I know. It's almost like a pirate state isn't exactly the ideal form of government.
They'll start pirating grain shipments rather than oil tankers then.
We shouldn't have it. It's awful. But awful. Yes, obviously this is going to be massively destabilizing for developing countries, which likely means that there's going to be an unprecedented wave of migration. And this is a prediction I'm willing to put my money behind, because this isn't going to have zero consequence. This is people who will likely not be able to afford to have food.
Like they might literally have famines and starve to death.
Yes, exactly.
So they are going to migrate.
And therefore, although in the West, in the developing world, in the developed world, we may not necessarily face famine, we may face unprecedented challenges with people trying to get to the West and the developed world, simply because in the developing world, they don't have the economies to deal with this shortage. And this is going to be something that is probably one of the worst tragedies. I mean, sure, we'll be okay in the developed world, but
comparatively,
for these people, yes. I mean, we're not going to be starving and dying.
Touch wood.
Can't guarantee it, actually. But yes, this is a crisis that I think no one's really talking about very much. And it's going to be horrendous. Give it a year or two, and we'll surely see the effects of this cost of living crisis.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast, The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the Contemplation series, this one between Josh and Harry on the collapse of Venezuela and the policies that led there. If you want to follow Harry, you can follow him at Getter at Harry Lotus Eater. Thank you and goodbye.